You've got one man, one bullet in Sarajevo, 1914. How in the world does that single moment ignite the absolute firestorm that was World War I? Well, it's complicated, for sure, but one nation's choices really acted as the key catalyst, turning what should have been a regional crisis into a global catastrophe. So today, we're going to break down exactly how Germany's decisions put the world on a collision course with war.
So, the story almost always kicks off with that one spark, right? The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And you can understand why the Austro-Hungarian Empire was absolutely furious. But really, on its own, this was a Balkan crisis. It was a regional dispute.
So how do you get from that to a war that completely redraws the map of the world and costs millions upon millions of lives? The answer, it turns out, isn't just in the assassination itself. It's in a series of critical, game-changing decisions made in the weeks that followed, especially by the German Empire.
Now, to really get a handle on Germany's role here, you have to understand that the assassination didn't happen in a vacuum. It was more like a match being thrown into a room just drenched in gasoline. And German policy in the years leading up to 1914 had been pouring that gasoline all over the floor. Okay, so the first and maybe the most important piece of this whole puzzle is the mindset that completely dominated the German leadership at the time. A deep, powerful belief in something called militarism. And this wasn't just about having a big, shiny army. No, it was a core part of their national identity and how they approached, well, everything.
So what does militarism actually mean in practice? It's basically a philosophy where military strength is seen as the #1 measure of a country's power. It's the belief that the best way to solve your problems with other countries isn't through talking it out, but through the threat of force, or, the actual use of it.
And what you're seeing here are two fundamentally opposed ways of looking at the world. On one hand, you have diplomacy, which is all about dialogue, compromise, and alliances for defense. But the German approach at the time? It was all about raw military strength, detailed plans for offensive war, and a drive for total dominance in Europe, not balance. This militaristic mindset led directly to the first truly catastrophic decision of the July 1914 crisis. It's a moment so important that historians have a name for it, the blank check. And honestly, this was the point of no return. So, right after the assassination, Austria-Hungary wanted to crush Serbia, but they were pretty nervous that Russia might step in to protect Serbia. So what do? They turned to their powerful ally, Germany, for backup. And Germany's response? Well, it would change the course of history. Unconditional support. Just stop and think about what that really means. Whatever Austria-Hungary wanted to do, no matter how aggressive, Germany would have their back with its entire military. No conditions, no calls for restraint, no strings attached. It was quite literally a blank check to go start a war. And the consequences of this were immediate and frankly disastrous. With Germany's promise in its back pocket, Austria-Hungary suddenly felt invincible. They sent an ultimatum to Serbia with demands so harsh it was basically designed to be rejected. Germany's promise completely removed any need for caution, making a war on the Balkans all but certain. But here's where it gets even crazier. Germany hadn't just given its political blessing for a war. Their own military strategy had literally trapped them. They had created a war plan so rigid, so dependent on a timetable, that once it was set in motion, diplomacy wasn't even an option anymore.
See, for years, German military planners had been obsessed with one single nightmare scenario, having to fight a war against both France in the west and Russia in the east at the same time. How could they possibly win that?
Their solution was this incredibly high-risk, all-or-nothing gamble called the Schlieffen Plan. On paper, it was a masterpiece of logistics, but it had one fatal flaw. It was completely and totally inflexible.
The plan was supposed to work like a perfect piece of clockwork. First, you'd invade neutral Belgium, violate international law right off the bat, to get around France's main defenses. The thinking was they had exactly 6 weeks to knock France out of the war before the huge but very slow Russian army would be ready to fight. Then you'd throw your entire army onto trains and race them to the east. Simple, right? And right there, that's the trap. The entire plan lived and died by speed. The second Russia started to mobilize its army to help Serbia, Germany believed it had to launch the Schlieffen Plan immediately. If they waited, they'd lose their tiny window to beat France. For them, mobilization literally meant war. There was no off switch. Military timetables had totally replaced political decision-making. Okay, so let's pull all these threads together for a second. What do we have? You've got a militaristic culture, a totally reckless political promise, and a dangerously rigid war plan. It was the absolute perfect storm, just waiting for a spark.
And you gotta remember, this wasn't some isolated incident.
In the years leading up to 1914, Germany's actions, from challenging France and Morocco to its constant hardline stances, had already frayed nerves all over the continent. This created an atmosphere of deep mistrust, long before the first shots were ever fired.
And this slide right here, it shows you just how terrifyingly fast everything fell apart. The blank check on July 5th leads directly to Austria's declaration of war. That triggers Russia to mobilize, which in turn forces Germany to hit the go button on the Schlieffen Plan. They declare war on Russia, then on France, they invade Belgium, and that's the last straw that brings Britain into the war. It was just a cascade, one event triggering the next, all escalating at a horrifying pace.
So while every major power absolutely played a role in the long, slow build-up to the war, it was the specific actions of Germany in July 1914, fueled by its militaristic culture, that unconditional blank check, and its inflexible war plan that were the critical catalyst that would turn a regional crisis into a world war.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty timeless and, frankly, chilling warning. When a nation starts to prioritize military victory over the possibility of peace, when it puts all its faith in rigid plans and just abandons diplomacy, is there any other possible outcome besides catastrophe?